It had been 6 months since Emily passed away. 6 months of trying to move on, trying to put my life back together. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, not in any way. She was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But then, something strange happened. It was a Wednesday night, and I was sitting alone in my apartment, scrolling through Facebook aimlessly. My feed was full of the usual nonsense, people arguing about politics, posting pictures of their pets, or sharing vacation photos. I was barely paying attention until I saw it. There was a notification, a new message on Facebook Messenger. I clicked on it absent-mindedly, but when the chat window popped up, my heart stopped. It was from Emily. Her profile picture smiled back at me, that familiar grin that used to make my heart leap. It was like she was still here, still laughing, still alive. But she wasn't. I knew she wasn't. She had died in a car accident last winter, leaving me shattered. And yet, there it was, a message from her account. The message read, "Hey, babe. I miss you." My stomach dropped. I froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. It had to be a mistake. A prank, maybe. Someone must have hacked her account, I reasoned. But who would be that cruel? I hesitated for a long time before replying. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. Finally, I typed, "Who is this?" Seconds felt like hours as I waited for a response. The little typing bubble appeared on the screen, and my anxiety spiked. When the reply came, it was simple, yet chilling. "It's me, Emily. Don't you recognize me?" I stared at the words, my mind racing. It couldn't be her. I knew it wasn't possible. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I hadn't heard from Emily's account since the funeral, when I had posted one final goodbye on her page. Her family had kept the account active as a memorial, but no one had used it. Not until now. I stood up, my legs shaky, pacing back and forth in my small apartment. This wasn't happening. It was just someone messing with me. That had to be it. Maybe one of her friends had access to her account. But why? Why would they do this? I sat back down, trying to steady my breathing. My hands shook as I typed out another message. "This isn't funny. Who are you really?" The response came almost immediately. "I'm not joking. I miss you, babe. Why aren't you answering me?" Panic surged through me. My mind flashed back to the accident. I could still remember the way her car looked when they found it, mangled and unrecognizable. I had spent weeks drowning in grief, trying to accept that she was gone. And now, this. I closed my laptop abruptly, as if shutting the screen would make it go away. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. The message had been too personal. The words felt like something Emily would say. It couldn't be her, but the way it was written, it was so familiar, so real. For hours, I sat in the dark, trying to calm my nerves, telling myself over and over that it wasn't her. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. End of chapter 1 #### chapter 2, the memories we shared. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Emily's face, the way it looked the last time I saw her, smiling and carefree. Then it would shift, twisting into the wreckage of her car, the memory of her funeral, and the hollow feeling of losing her all over again. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy chest, the events of the previous night swirling in my mind. I grabbed my phone, reluctantly opening Facebook. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Maybe the messages weren't even there. But they were. Staring back at me, like a ghost refusing to rest. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the message icon. Part of me wanted to delete the entire conversation, to erase whatever cruel trick was being played on me. But another part, an irrational, desperate part, needed answers. I opened the chat. My last message was still there. "This isn't funny. Who are you really?" I scrolled up to reread the strange conversation. The words felt foreign but intimate, almost as if I could hear Emily's voice saying them in my mind. That was what scared me the most. Whoever was behind this knew me. I decided to confront it again. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt. My hands still trembled as I typed. "How do you know me? Tell me something only Emily would know." I hit send and waited. The seconds ticked by, and for a moment, I thought that maybe the person would disappear, leaving this nightmare behind. But the typing bubble appeared once again. My heart pounded in my chest as the message came through. "You remember our first date at the little coffee shop? You ordered a cappuccino and spilled it all over yourself. I couldn't stop laughing, and you turned so red. I kissed you afterward, even though you were embarrassed." I gasped, feeling the air leave my lungs. My entire body tensed up. That memory, no one else knew that story. We had never told anyone about our first date, about how I had made a fool of myself. It was just one of those intimate moments shared between two people, tucked away in the quiet corners of our relationship. I didn't reply immediately. My thoughts were a whirlwind. Was this real? Was someone watching me this whole time? How could they know that? It felt impossible, but the details were too perfect, too exact. I was suddenly thrust back into that day, Emily's laugh, the warmth of her kiss, the awkwardness melting away in the soft light of the cafe. But no. This couldn't be her. She was gone. I had buried her, said goodbye. This was a twisted joke, someone digging into my past for reasons I couldn't fathom. I typed furiously this time, anger rising in my chest. "How are you doing this? Who the hell are you?" Another message popped up, and this one made my skin crawl. "Why don't you believe me? I told you, it's me, Emily. I've been trying to reach you, but you're not listening." I slammed my laptop shut again, feeling a surge of panic, confusion, and grief. My heart raced as my mind fought to reconcile what was happening. Was it really her? Was it possible that Emily was somehow still here? Could she be reaching out from the other side? I had never believed in ghosts, never entertained the idea that the dead could communicate with the living. But this was different. This was personal. I decided to talk to someone, but who could I tell? I imagined myself explaining it to a friend, * my dead girlfriend is messaging me on Facebook. *. They'd think I had lost my mind, that the grief had finally broken me. I had to think clearly, logically. I needed to find out who could access her account. It had to be a hacker or someone from her family. That was the only explanation that made sense. I picked up my phone and called Sarah, Emily's best friend. If anyone had access, maybe it was her. Sarah picked up after a few rings, her voice warm but strained. "Hey, how are you holding up?" she asked, her tone soft. Ever since Emily's death, Sarah had been my lifeline, checking in on me when she could. "Not great," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to ask you something. It's going to sound weird." "Go ahead," she said cautiously. "Has anyone been using Emily's Facebook account? Have you?" "I don't know, seen anything strange." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the confusion in her silence. "What do you mean?" "No, her account is still there, but no one's touched it. Her parents wanted to keep it as a memorial." "Why?" I swallowed, unsure how much to say. "Someone's been messaging me from her account, Sarah. They're saying things only she would know." Her voice dropped to a whisper, concern thickening in her words. "What? That's impossible, she Are you sure it's not a hacker or something? That's what I thought too, I said, pacing the room. But they're saying things only Emily knew. It's like she's really there, Sarah. It doesn't make any sense. There was a long pause, and then Sarah finally said, maybe it's time to let go, you know? Emily wouldn't want you holding on like this. I'm not holding on, I said defensively. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized they weren't true. I was holding on. I had never let her go. And now, it seemed, neither had she. End of chapter 2 ### chapter 3, Echoes from the Past. After my call with Sarah, the unsettling feeling lingered. I tried to go about my day, doing anything to distract myself from the eerie messages, but Emily's voice, her words kept repeating in my head. Could it really be her? Was I losing my mind? Later that evening, I sat down in front of my laptop again. I knew I shouldn't open the messages, but something pulled me back, like a compulsion I couldn't resist. Maybe I needed closure, needed to understand what was happening, even if it hurt. The conversation was still there, staring back at me like an open wound. Emily's profile photo, the same one she'd had for over a year, smiled back, frozen in time. I hovered over the message box, unsure of what to say. What do you even say to someone who's supposed to be dead? Before I could type anything, another message popped up. Do you remember the cabin? I froze, my fingers stiff over the keyboard. The cabin. Of course, I remembered the cabin. How could I forget? Emily and I had spent a weekend there the year before, tucked away in the woods, disconnected from everything. It had been one of our happiest memories, a little escape from the world. We hadn't told anyone about it, though. It had been our secret getaway. No social media posts, no pictures, just us, alone in nature. There was no way anyone else could know about it. My heart raced as I read the next message. You made me pancakes, and they were terrible, but I ate them anyway. I couldn't stop laughing. Do you remember? I did remember. My pancakes had been a disaster, burnt on the outside and raw in the middle, but Emily had eaten them anyway, laughing the whole time. It was such a small, intimate moment, one I had almost forgotten about until now. Whoever was behind this knew too much. This wasn't just a hacker or someone messing with me. It felt like Emily, like she was really reaching out. My mind whirled with possibilities. Could grief do this to someone? Could it make them believe in the impossible? Or was something darker at play? I typed slowly, my hands trembling as I wrote. How do you know all of this? What do you want from me? I stared at the screen, waiting for the response, every muscle in my body tense. The seconds dragged on, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whoever was doing this had finally stopped. But then, the typing bubble appeared again. I want you to come to the cabin. My blood ran cold. What? The cabin? Why? My heart pounded as I stared at the screen in disbelief. Why would she want me to go back there? Come to the cabin, and we can be together again. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. This was insane. There was no way this was Emily. She was gone, buried 6 feet underground. And yet, the pull was undeniable. Something inside me stirred, a deep, gnawing curiosity mixed with fear and desperation. I paced the room, trying to think rationally, trying to make sense of what was happening. I needed to stop. I needed to block the account, delete the messages, and move on with my life. But a part of me couldn't let it go. What if it really was her? What if there was some truth in the madness? I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept drifting back to the cabin, to the memories we'd shared there, and to the messages. The more I thought about it, the more the idea of going back seemed unavoidable. I had to go. Not because I believed in ghosts, but because I needed to know the truth. I needed to put this to rest. Dash. The next morning, I found myself packing a bag. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do this. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through dense forests and empty roads. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. It was like driving into another world, away from the noise and chaos of real life. The cabin stood just as it had before, small, rustic, nestled between towering trees. It looked untouched, as though time had forgotten about it. I parked the car and stepped out, the cool air biting at my skin. Everything was silent, eerily so. No birds, no wind, just stillness. I hesitated before walking toward the front door. My heart pounded with every step, my breath shallow. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew that something was waiting for me here. When I opened the door, the cabin felt cold, like the warmth of our memories had long since faded. I stepped inside, the floor creaking under my feet. Everything was just as we'd left it: the furniture, the blankets, the firewood stacked neatly by the hearth. I stood in the center of the room, looking around, waiting. For what? I didn't know. The stillness was suffocating, the silence heavy. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. Another message from Emily. "I'm here." I swallowed hard, my heart racing. I looked around the empty cabin, my eyes darting from corner to corner. Nothing. No one. But I could feel it, an overwhelming presence, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching me. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't explain. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, there was a noise. A faint creak, like footsteps on the wooden floor. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. No one. But the sound came again, closer this time. "Come find me," the message said. I backed up slowly, my heart thundering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as I stood there, frozen in place, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I realized something. I wasn't alone. Dash. End of chapter 3. Chapter 3, Echoes from the Past. After my call with Sarah, the unsettling feeling lingered. I tried to go about my day, doing anything to distract myself from the eerie messages, but Emily's voice, her words kept repeating in my head. Could it really be her? Was I losing my mind? Later that evening, I sat down in front of my laptop again. I knew I shouldn't open the messages, but something pulled me back, like a compulsion I couldn't resist. Maybe I needed closure, needed to understand what was happening, even if it hurt. The conversation was still there, staring back at me like an open wound. Emily's profile photo, the same one she'd had for over a year, smiled back, frozen in time. I hovered over the message box, unsure of what to say. What do you even say to someone who's supposed to be dead? Before I could type anything, another message popped up. Do you remember the cabin? I froze, my fingers stiff over the keyboard. The cabin. Of course, I remembered the cabin. How could I forget? Emily and I had spent a weekend there the year before, tucked away in the woods, disconnected from everything. It had been one of our happiest memories, a little escape from the world. We hadn't told anyone about it, though. It had been our secret getaway. No social media posts, no pictures, just us, alone in nature. There was no way anyone else could know about it. My heart raced as I read the next message. You made me pancakes, and they were terrible, but I ate them anyway. I couldn't stop laughing. Do you remember? I did remember. My pancakes had been a disaster, burnt on the outside and raw in the middle, but Emily had eaten them anyway, laughing the whole time. It was such a small, intimate moment, one I had almost forgotten about until now. Whoever was behind this knew too much. This wasn't just a hacker or someone messing with me. It felt like Emily, like she was really reaching out. My mind whirled with possibilities. Could grief do this to someone? Could it make them believe in the impossible? Or was something darker at play? I typed slowly, my hands trembling as I wrote. How do you know all of this? What do you want from me? I stared at the screen, waiting for the response, every muscle in my body tense. The seconds dragged on, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe whoever was doing this had finally stopped. But then, the typing bubble appeared again. I want you to come to the cabin. My blood ran cold. What? The cabin? Why? My heart pounded as I stared at the screen in disbelief. Why would she want me to go back there? Come to the cabin, and we can be together again. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing. This was insane. There was no way this was Emily. She was gone, buried 6 feet underground. And yet, the pull was undeniable. Something inside me stirred a deep, gnawing curiosity mixed with fear and desperation. I paced the room, trying to think rationally, trying to make sense of what was happening. I needed to stop. I needed to block the account, delete the messages, and move on with my life. But a part of me couldn't let it go. What if it really was her? What if there was some truth in the madness? I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept drifting back to the cabin, to the memories we'd shared there, and to the messages. The more I thought about it, the more the idea of going back seemed unavoidable. I had to go. Not because I believed in ghosts, but because I needed to know the truth. I needed to put this to rest. The next morning, I found myself packing a bag. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do this. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through dense forests and empty roads. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. It was like driving into another world, away from the noise and chaos of real life. The cabin stood just as it had before, small, rustic, nestled between towering trees. It looked untouched, as though time had forgotten about it. I parked the car and stepped out, the cool air biting at my skin. Everything was silent, eerily so. No birds, no wind, just stillness. I hesitated before walking toward the front door. My heart pounded with every step, my breath shallow. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew that something was waiting for me here. When I opened the door, the cabin felt cold, like the warmth of our memories had long since faded. I stepped inside, the floor creaking under my feet. Everything was just as we'd left it: the furniture, the blankets, the firewood stacked neatly by the hearth. I stood in the center of the room, looking around, waiting. For what? I didn't know. The stillness was suffocating, the silence heavy. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. Another message from Emily. I'm here. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. I looked around the empty cabin, my eyes darting from corner to corner. Nothing. No one. But I could feel it, an overwhelming presence, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching me. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't explain. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, there was a noise. A faint creak, like footsteps on the wooden floor. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. No one. But the sound came again, closer this time. Come find me, the message said. I backed up slowly, my heart thundering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as I stood there, frozen in place, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I realized something. I wasn't alone. Dash. End of chapter 3 #### chapter 4, Whispers in the Dark. The cabin's air grew denser, pressing against my chest as I stood frozen, unable to make sense of the situation. I wasn't alone, that much was clear. But who or what was here with me? The creaking continued, faint but distinct, as if someone or something was walking slowly across the floor. My eyes darted from the door to the windows, but there was no sign of movement. Just the suffocating silence of the room and the weight of the unknown bearing down on me. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Why are you scared? It's just me. I took a step back, my legs shaking. The familiar tone of Emily's words did nothing to comfort me. If anything, it made my heart pound harder. Whoever or whatever was behind this, knew me. Knew her. I swallowed, trying to steady my nerves. I didn't want to believe it, but a part of me was drawn to the idea that this was Emily, reaching out from somewhere beyond. Maybe it was the grief, or maybe it was the isolation of the cabin, but I felt a pull to respond. Something inside me needed to know. With shaky hands, I typed a reply. Where are you? As soon as I hit send, I regretted it. My fingers tingled, and a cold sweat dripped down my back. I was about to turn and leave when my phone buzzed again, almost immediately. I'm upstairs. Come find me. I stared at the message, my heart racing. Upstairs. I hadn't been to the second floor of the cabin since Emily and I had last stayed here. The thought of going up there now, alone, in the dark, sent a wave of dread through me. But I couldn't just walk away. Not now. I took a deep breath and moved slowly toward the staircase at the back of the cabin. Each step felt like I was moving deeper into something I couldn't understand, something that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. The stairs creaked loudly under my weight, the sound echoing through the empty cabin. I gripped the wooden banister tightly, feeling the rough texture of the old wood beneath my fingertips. The second floor was dark, the only light coming from the small window at the end of the hall, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I stopped at the top of the stairs, peering down the hallway. There were 3 doors, one to the bathroom, one to the guest room, and one to the room Emily and I had stayed in. My phone buzzed again. I'm in our room. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel, the door to our room looming at the end, half open. The air felt colder up here, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, each thud louder than the last. Step by step, I walked toward the door. My mind raced with memories of that weekend, the laughter, the warmth, the feeling of being in love. But those memories felt distant now, replaced by the overwhelming sense of unease that hung in the air. I reached the door and pushed it open slowly, my breath catching in my throat as I stepped inside. The room was just as we had left it, a neatly made bed, the curtains drawn, a small nightstand with a lamp beside it. But something was different. The air felt thick, heavy with a presence I couldn't see. It was like stepping into the past, except the warmth and comfort of that memory had been replaced with a cold, unsettling stillness. I scanned the room, looking for something, anything that would explain the messages. But it was empty. No signs of anyone, no footsteps, no figure in the shadows. Just, nothing. My phone buzzed again, and I jumped, nearly dropping it. The message sent a chill down my spine. Look under the bed. I stared at the phone, my pulse racing. No. No way. I wasn't doing that. This was insane. I needed to leave. Now. But something kept me rooted to the spot. I don't know if it was morbid curiosity or something deeper, but I couldn't just walk away. Slowly, I crouched down, my heart hammering in my chest as I peered under the bed. At first, I didn't see anything. Just dust and shadows. But then, in the far corner, Something caught my eye, something small and metallic. I reached out, my hand shaking, and grabbed it, pulling it out from beneath the bed. It was a phone. Emily's old phone. I stood up quickly, holding the phone in my hand, my mind racing. How was this possible? I thought it had been lost in the accident. We'd never found it, and now, here it was, in the cabin, under the bed. The screen was cracked, and the battery was long dead. But it was hers, there was no mistaking that. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. I looked down at the screen, my blood running cold. Now you know. I've always been here. My hands shook as I stared at the message, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I backed up, my body trembling with fear. The air in the room felt suffocating, as if something invisible was closing in on me. And then I heard it. A soft, faint whisper. Stay with me. I spun around, my eyes wide, but the room was still empty. The whisper had been so close, as if someone had spoken directly into my ear. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet as I backed out of the room. I needed to get out of there. Now. I turned and ran down the hallway, my footsteps echoing loudly on the wooden floor. As I reached the stairs, my phone buzzed one last time. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. My eyes were drawn to the screen. You can't leave me. Not again. I bolted down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting me like a shock to the system. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. I got into the car and drove, not looking back at the cabin, not stopping until I was miles away, back in the safety of my apartment. But even then, as I sat alone in the dark, my phone silent for the first time all day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That somehow, Emily was still with me. Watching. Waiting. End of chapter 4 ### chapter 5, The Unseen Shadow. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily, her face, her smile, her voice whispering in my ear. It was impossible to escape the lingering sense that she was still there, even in the silence of my apartment. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that the messages were some cruel joke, a trick of the mind brought on by grief and loss. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. The phone, the messages, the whispers in the cabin, none of it made sense. The next day, I tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. I went to work, answered emails, did my best to focus on mundane tasks. But the cabin, the messages, and the eerie sensation of being watched stayed with me, lingering at the edges of my thoughts like an unwelcome shadow. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. I couldn't keep running from it. There was no way I could talk to anyone about it, not Sarah, not my family, not my friends. They'd think I was losing my mind. But I needed help. I needed someone who could tell me what was going on. I decided to visit someone who might be able to give me answers. There was a woman in town, an old friend of my mother's, who was known for her spiritual work. People whispered about her, said she could connect with the other side, that she had a gift. I had never believed in that kind of thing before, but now, after everything, I wasn't so sure. Her name was Grace, and she lived in a small, cluttered house at the edge of town. I hadn't seen her in years, but I knew where to find her. As I drove to her house, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in as if reflecting the weight of what was happening. The closer I got, the more I felt a strange mix of hope and fear. What if she could help? What if she told me something I wasn't ready to hear? I parked outside and took a deep breath before knocking on the door. It creaked open after a moment, and Grace stood there, her eyes sharp and curious. She was older than I remembered, her face lined with age, but her presence strong, almost unsettling. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a wry smile. I hesitated, unsure of how to even begin. "I need your help. Something strange has been happening." Grace stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. Her home was filled with the smell of incense, and the dim lighting made the room feel otherworldly, like I had stepped into a different realm altogether. She led me to a small table in the back, covered in candles, crystals, and old books. "Tell me what's been going on," she said, her voice calm but commanding. I sat down, fidgeting with my hands as I told her everything about Emily, the accident, the messages, the cabin. I tried to leave out the more unbelievable parts, but once I started talking, it all spilled out. Grace listened in silence, her eyes never leaving mine, as if she was reading something deeper in me than just the words I was saying. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap. "You're not crazy," she said, her voice steady. "But you're not dealing with something natural." I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. "What do you mean?" Grace stood and moved to a shelf, pulling down a small, worn book. "There are many things in this world that we don't understand: spirits, energy, echoes of the past. Sometimes, when someone dies suddenly, tragically, their spirit doesn't move on. It lingers, attached to the people they loved, the places they held dear." She flipped through the book, her fingers tracing old, faded pages. "Your Emily, she might be one of those spirits. But she's not just a memory. She's attached to you, deeply. She's trying to reach you." My heart raced, the room feeling suddenly too small, too close. "Why? Why now?" Grace looked up, her eyes serious. "Because you haven't let her go. And until you do, she won't rest." I shook my head, my voice shaking. I've tried to move on, but you haven't," she interrupted gently. "You're still holding on to the past, to her. And that's why she's still here. Spirits like Emily, ones who were taken too soon, they can cling to the living, to their memories. They don't always realize they're gone. To her, this might just be unfinished business." I felt a lump in my throat. "So what do I do? How do I help her move on?" Grace closed the book and looked at me with a mix of sympathy and seriousness. "You have to confront her. You have to tell her the truth, that she's gone. She needs to hear it from you. Only then will she be able to move on." My blood ran cold. The thought of confronting Emily, of telling her she was gone, made me feel sick to my core. How could I do that? How could I face her again, after everything that had happened? Grace must have sensed my hesitation. "It won't be easy. Spirits like Emily can be attached. The bond you had was strong, and it won't break easily. But if you want peace for both of you, you have to face her." I nodded, though my mind was still reeling. The idea of confronting Emily, of seeing her again, terrified me. But I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep living in fear, wondering if she was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to slip back into the past. Grace stood and handed me a small bundle of sage. "Take this with you. Burn it when you're ready. It'll help cleanse the space, clear the energy." I took the bundle, feeling its rough texture in my hands. "And then what?" Grace smiled softly. "Then, you'll say goodbye." Dash. The drive back home was quiet, the sky darkening as rain began to fall. The cabin loomed in my mind, the last place I had truly felt Emily's presence. If I was going to confront her, if I was going to do this right, I had to go back. Back to where it all started. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the bundle of sage on my nightstand, my thoughts racing, preparing myself for what I knew I had to do. Tomorrow, I would go back to the cabin. Tomorrow, I would face Emily one last time. And this time, I would say goodbye. Dash. End of chapter 5 #### chapter 6, Return to the cabin. The morning was still and quiet, a heavy fog blanketing the road as I drove back to the cabin. The weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me, making each mile feel longer, more difficult to bear. The sage bundle rested on the passenger seat, its faint scent filling the car, a reminder of the task ahead. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to forget this, to leave the cabin behind and try to move on without reopening old wounds. But I knew that if I didn't face Emily now, if I didn't confront whatever was left of her, I would never find peace. The cabin came into view through the mist, standing as a ghostly silhouette against the backdrop of trees. It looked almost the same as it had the last time I was here, silent, cold, waiting. I parked the car and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my feet breaking the eerie stillness. The forest around me felt alive in a way it hadn't before, like it was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. My breath fogged in the chilly air, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I grabbed the bundle of sage, tucking it into my jacket pocket. I didn't know if it would actually work, if it would do anything to help, but it was my only shield against the unknown. I took a deep breath and walked toward the cabin. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, the air inside cool and still. Everything looked just as I had left it, unchanged, yet filled with a weight that hadn't been there before. Every corner of the room seemed darker, the shadows deeper, as if the cabin itself had absorbed the sorrow and fear of the last few days. I stood in the center of the room, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me, watching me from the edges of the room. "Emily," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I'm here." There was no response, only the soft creaking of the cabin as it settled. But I could feel it, the same presence I had felt the last time. She was here. Somewhere. Waiting. I pulled the bundle of sage from my pocket, my hands trembling as I struck a match and lit the dry leaves. The smoke curled upward, filling the room with its pungent scent. I didn't know the right words to say, didn't know if there was some ritual I was supposed to follow. All I knew was that I needed to talk to her. "Emily," I said again, louder this time. "If you're here, I need to talk to you." The air seemed to shift, the temperature dropping by several degrees. A soft creak echoed through the room, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from above. The second floor. Just like before. I swallowed hard, clutching the sage bundle tighter in my hand. "Emily, please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything that happened, but you're not supposed to be here." Another creak. Closer this time. The footsteps were moving toward the stairs. I took a step back, fear gripping me, but I forced myself to keep talking. "You need to go. You're gone, Emily. You've been gone for a long time, and you can't stay here anymore." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the room was silent again, the only sound the crackling of the burning sage in my hand. But then, there was a voice. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. Why? It was her. Emily's voice, but distorted, like it was coming from somewhere far away, somewhere just out of reach. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because, you're not alive anymore. You need to move on. You need to let go." The air grew heavier, pressing down on me like a weight. I could feel her presence growing stronger, filling the space around me. My mind raced with memories, her laugh, her smile, the way she had looked at me during those quiet moments when it was just the two of us. But those memories were tainted now, twisted by the darkness that hung between us. "I don't want to go." The voice was louder now, closer. It echoed through the cabin, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I took a step back, my breath shallow. "You have to," I said, my voice breaking. You don't belong here anymore, Emily. You can't stay with me. You need to find peace. The footsteps resumed, slow and deliberate, descending the stairs. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her closer with every step, her presence pressing against me like a suffocating fog. Please, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. Please let me go. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, just out of sight. I could feel her, just on the other side of the wall, waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to let her go. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes. Goodbye, Emily. For a moment, everything was still. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. And then, slowly, the heaviness began to lift. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had hung over the room dissipating like smoke in the wind. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see her standing there, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no shadowy presence lurking in the corners. It was over. I stood there for a long time, the sage still burning in my hand, watching the smoke rise and curl toward the ceiling. I didn't feel relief, not yet. Just an overwhelming sense of emptiness, like I had finally let go of something I had been holding onto for far too long. Eventually, I left the cabin, closing the door behind me with a finality that I hadn't felt before. I walked back to the car in silence, the fog still hanging in the air, but lighter now, less oppressive. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing in the doorway, watching me go. But there was nothing. For the first time since the messages had started, I felt a sense of closure. I had said goodbye. Emily was gone. Truly gone. And maybe now, I could finally move on too. End of chapter 6 #### chapter 7, The Final Echo. The drive back from the cabin felt strangely quiet, even peaceful. The weight I had been carrying for so long was starting to lift, but there was a hollowness in its place. It wasn't the kind of closure I had imagined. Letting Emily go hadn't been a moment of catharsis or release. It was more like watching a door close on a chapter of my life that had defined me for so long, leaving me in the silence of what came after. When I got back to my apartment, I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the normalcy of everything. The clutter of my life, the dishes, the laundry, the unmade bed, all looked so ordinary. It was a stark contrast to what I had just experienced. I put the sage bundle down on the table, its scent still lingering on my clothes, and collapsed onto the couch. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it was over. That Emily had found peace, and that I could too. That night, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I didn't wake up until the sun was streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. The world felt different, lighter, less haunted. I had spent so long in the shadow of Emily's memory that I almost didn't know how to exist without it. The next few days passed quietly. I returned to work, went about my routines, and slowly began to feel like myself again. The gnawing fear that had clung to me was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. I hadn't received any more messages, and the cabin was just a distant memory, something I could almost convince myself had been a bad dream. But then, one evening, just as I was beginning to let my guard down, it happened. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it absent-mindedly, expecting a text from a coworker or a reminder about a bill. But when I saw the screen, my heart sank. New message from Emily. For a moment, I just stared at it, my body frozen in place. It didn't make sense. I had said goodbye. I had let her go. How could there be another message? My hands trembled as I picked up the phone, my pulse quickening. I tapped the message icon, half expecting it to be some glitch, some mistake. But it wasn't. Did you think it would be that easy? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my stomach twist, the air in the room suddenly growing cold again. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I had done everything Grace had said. I had burned the sage, I had said goodbye. Emily was supposed to be gone. But this message, it wasn't like the others. It didn't feel like Emily. It felt darker, angrier, like something else had taken over. Something more sinister. I backed away from the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't do this again. I couldn't go back to that place of fear, of constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for something to reach out from the past. But before I could even think of what to do next, my phone buzzed again. "You don't get to walk away." The words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't Emily. I knew that now. Whatever this was, it wasn't her spirit trying to hold on. It was something else entirely. Something that had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment without thinking. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. My mind raced back to Grace. She had told me that spirits like Emily could linger if they weren't at peace, but she hadn't warned me about what might happen if something darker had attached itself to me. I drove through the darkened streets, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, until I found myself outside Grace's house again. The lights were on, and I could see her moving inside, preparing for whatever work she did in the evenings. I knocked urgently, and after a moment, the door swung open. Grace took one look at my face and stepped aside, wordlessly letting me in. She didn't ask any questions as she led me to the same table where we had sat before. "I need your help," I said, my voice shaking. "It's not over. It's something else." Grace didn't look surprised, but there was a heaviness in her eyes that made my stomach twist. She sat across from me, her hands folded neatly on the table. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. I explained everything, the new messages, the feeling that it wasn't Emily anymore. Grace listened in silence, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she sighed deeply and leaned back in her chair. "I was afraid of this," she said. "Sometimes, when you try to break a connection with a spirit, you leave space for something else to slip in. Especially if there's been trauma or strong emotion tied to that place, that person." I shook my head, feeling a wave of panic rising in my chest. "So what is it? What's doing this?" Grace stood and walked to the window, looking out into the dark night. "It's not Emily. Not anymore. Whatever this is, it's feeding off the pain and fear you've been carrying. It latched onto you when you were vulnerable, and now it's using Emily's memory to keep you trapped." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "So how do I stop it? How do I get rid of it?" Grace turned back to me, her eyes dark and serious. "You need to sever the connection completely. Burn everything that ties you to that place, to her. The cabin, her things, the messages, everything. If there's even a trace left, it will keep finding its way back to you." I swallowed hard. The thought of destroying everything connected to Emily, everything we had shared, felt like erasing her from my life completely. But I knew Grace was right. Whatever was haunting me wasn't Emily, and if I didn't act now, it would never leave me alone. Grace handed me a small vial of oil and a handful of dried herbs. "Use these when you're ready. It'll help cleanse whatever energy is still attached to you." I nodded, feeling the weight of what I had to do settling in. I didn't want to go back to the cabin. I didn't want to relieve any of it. But I knew I had no choice. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Grace placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "You're stronger than you think. Just remember, this isn't about Emily anymore. It's about you taking control of your life again." That night, I returned to my apartment, the vial and herbs tucked safely in my pocket. I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the messages on my phone, trying to summon the strength to do what I had to do. And then, I deleted them. Every single one. I packed up the few things I had kept of Emily's: a necklace, a few photos, a worn-out sweater, and placed them in a box. Tomorrow, I would go back to the cabin one last time, and I would burn it all. It was time to end this. For good. End of chapter 7 ### chapter 8, the final confrontation. The sun rose slowly the next morning, casting a soft, golden light over everything. I took a deep breath, letting the light wash over me, and tried to shake off the lingering fear from the previous night. Today was the day I would face whatever darkness had settled around me, and I wouldn't let it control me any longer. I gathered the box of Emily's things and the vial of cleansing oil, stuffing them into a sturdy bag. My hands were steady, though my heart raced with a mix of anxiety and determination. I wasn't just going back to the cabin, I was going to reclaim my life. The drive to the cabin felt different this time. It was still quiet, but I was no longer paralyzed by fear. I had a purpose, and with every mile, I felt more empowered, ready to confront the shadows that had haunted me for far too long. When I arrived, the cabin stood as it always had, but this time it felt different, vulnerable, as if it knew what was about to happen. I parked and stepped out, the air thick with anticipation. I could hear the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds, but there was an underlying tension that I couldn't shake. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door, and the familiar scent of wood and earth washed over me. The interior was just as I remembered, dim and quiet. I walked to the center of the room, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me, and set the box down on the floor. "Okay," I whispered to myself, gathering my courage. "Let's do this." I took out the necklace first, holding it up in the light. It had once sparkled like a star, a symbol of our love, but now it felt heavy with sorrow. I dropped it into the box, the clink echoing in the stillness. Next came the photos, snapshots of laughter, adventure, and love, each one a reminder of happier times. I hesitated, the memories flooding back, but I steeled myself. I had to let go. With a deep breath, I added them to the box. Finally, I picked up the worn-out sweater, inhaling the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered. Tears welled in my eyes, but I fought them back. "Goodbye, Emily," I said softly. "Thank you for everything." I dropped the sweater into the box, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. This was it. I was letting go of the past, of the memories that had bound me to a time and a person that no longer existed. Once the box was filled, I reached for the vial of oil. I poured a small amount into my hands, rubbing them together until the scent of cleansing herbs filled the air. The smell was grounding, a reminder of Grace's words: this was about reclaiming my life. With determination, I began to walk around the cabin, anointing the corners and doorways with the oil. I repeated the words Grace had taught me, feeling the energy shift in the room with each pass. "I release you, Emily. I release all that ties me to this place and to the pain. You are free, and I am free." As I finished, I felt a wave of energy pass through me, and the atmosphere in the cabin began to change. The air felt lighter, as if the weight of grief that had hung over me was finally lifting. With everything prepared, I moved outside, carrying the box and a lighter I had brought with me. The sunlight felt warm against my skin, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. I found a spot a safe distance from the cabin, the ground soft beneath my feet. Setting the box down, I took a moment to breathe in the fresh air, gathering my thoughts. This was it. I would release everything: my pain, my guilt, the memories that had haunted me for too long. I lit the lighter, the flame dancing in the wind, and held it to the edge of the box. The fabric of the sweater caught fire first, the flames licking at it hungrily. I watched as the fire spread, consuming the photos and the necklace, the flames twisting and curling like smoke signals rising to the sky. "I let you go," I repeated, my voice firm, carrying on the breeze. You are free. As the fire crackled and burned, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. The memories, good and bad, were being released into the air, leaving behind only the essence of what had once been. But just as I began to feel a sense of closure, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing. I turned, feeling a chill creep up my spine as the temperature dropped sharply. Shadows flickered around me, and I could sense a presence returning, more powerful than before. No! I shouted, my heart racing. You can't have this. You're not welcome here. The wind howled, and I felt the energy shift once again. The dark presence I had sensed before was rising, wrapping around me like a shroud, trying to pull me back into the despair I had fought so hard to escape. But I remembered Grace's words: this wasn't about Emily anymore. I took a deep breath, channeling my anger and fear into determination. I stepped closer to the fire, the flames roaring higher, casting flickering light across the clearing. Leave me alone! I shouted, the fear in my voice transforming into strength. You have no power over me. The wind howled louder, the shadows closing in, but I stood my ground, feeling the warmth of the fire beside me. You don't belong here. I am reclaiming my life. With that, I reached for the last remnants of the oil, pouring it onto the flames. They surged higher, illuminating the clearing with a fierce light that cut through the shadows. As the fire roared, I felt the darkness recede, the oppressive weight lifting. The wind howled one last time before dissipating into silence, leaving only the sound of crackling flames behind. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching as the fire consumed everything I had tried to hold onto. And slowly, the shadows around me began to fade, their presence growing weaker until there was nothing left but light and warmth. When the fire finally died down, I was left standing in the clearing, the air fresh and clean around me. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The box was reduced to ashes, the remnants of my past now scattered on the wind. I felt a sense of freedom wash over me, a lightness I hadn't experienced in so long. I turned back toward the cabin, now just a shadow in the sunlight. I would never return here, not in the same way. I had faced my demons, confronted the darkness, and I had won. As I drove away, I felt a sense of peace settling into my heart. It was time to embrace the future, to live without the weight of the past dragging me down. The messages had stopped, and I was free. End of chapter 8.